Primaries are pretty simple because they look just like a regular election, only it's just party members in one state. But let's look at a more complicated nomination process, which is what you see going on in the picture here. This is the caucus. You'll notice all these people are in the same room. They seem to be voting in front of each other. This is going to take a long time, and often different candidates win this. Not all the time, but as you see in the newspaper report there, you see Obama won in Iowa, and you see Huckabee won for the Republicans there. You probably haven't heard of Huckabee. That's the thing about caucuses, is we will sometimes have strange candidates win because it takes a different style of campaigning to win there. A caucus plays all of the same roles as a primary. That means we're narrowing down the choices. We are making a nominee for the party, and all of this we're letting the voters of a party choose. But what happens here is the candidates have to rely more on organization and strategy because of the way that the activity plays out. This also gives out delegates for the convention, so it is the same as a primary. It just depends on what a state chooses to do. But this is a much older way of how the political parties used to choose the nominees. The primary is the normal way, and it's easy to understand, but this is an old, complicated way of how this works. So to start with, in a caucus, all the people that are going to participate, the party members, they have to meet in one place at the same time. So they're all going to be there together. It usually happens at like a school or a church or a community center, some like centrally located place within a neighborhood or something like that where a bunch of party members can meet. The voters are going to discuss the candidates in front of each other. They're going to debate about the candidates before they have a vote. And when they vote, it's an open vote, meaning that it is in front of each other. They literally stand up or raise their hands or move to different parts of the room. If there's a lot of candidates and no candidate gets a majority, then what happens is the candidate with the least amount of support is eliminated, and you begin that process again. So the voters who chose the least popular candidate are now going to have to make a new choice. And this process is going to go over and over again, eliminating candidates until at least one of the candidates there ends up with 51% of the voters. So caucuses take a lot of time and effort from the voter. The primary was different. The primary, you just show up and you vote and you leave, and you're probably done in 5 minutes if there's no line. The caucus is going to take hours. Only the most hardcore, diehard party members are going to spend their day or their night participating in the caucus. The voters will have been recruited by the campaigns. So the campaigns will reach out and find the most dedicated voters to go to the caucus meetings because they know it's going to take a long time to do. They know that less people are willing to do it. And so less people participate in a caucus than in the primary. The campaigns have to find which voters are the most dedicated. The most famous caucus we deal with is the Iowa caucus. This is the first one. This is the first nominating contest period. It happens a week before the New Hampshire primary. It is important and it gets a lot of attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean the candidate will be as successful as the one who wins the New Hampshire primary. Caucuses are weird, and sometimes weird candidates win because they have the most loyal supporters or they have the best organized supporters here. So winning is important, but since it's a caucus, the candidates with the best strategy often win instead of those with the most overall popularity. So you can see the results in 2016 there. Ted Cruz won the Iowa caucus, and he's definitely not the most popular candidate in that race. He beat Donald Trump. He beat Marco Rubio. Clinton and Sanders on the Democratic side were pretty much tied, even though in most primaries around the country, Hillary Clinton won easily. It was very, very close between Clinton and Sanders. So the outcomes are often different in a caucus than they would be in a primary. So the candidates who win the caucus in Iowa don't necessarily have the same amount of success in the primaries. So the most important thing to remember about the caucus is it requires much more effort from the voter. They have to be willing to participate for a long time. They're going to mostly be filled with the most hardcore supporters for a candidate, way more so than in a primary. So the candidates who are the voters who are most passionate have a good chance of convincing other people to caucus with them. A candidate that runs in the caucus, they have to find the best organized and the most passionate supporters. Where the candidate running in just the primary, they may just have to worry about name recognition and appealing in advertisements and stuff. But the voters here in the caucus, a lot like in the primary, the voters are going to be a much more liberal in the Democratic primary and much more conservative in the Republican primary than the people who are in the general election. So let's recap the main differences between the two here. In the primary, it's easy for voters. They just come, they vote, they leave. So you're going to have way more turnout. In this case, the voters have complete control over the nominee here, and this is what most of the states use. This is really common because we're used to it. The caucus takes a big time commitment. This could take a long several hours. There could be many rounds of debating and voting, so way less people participate. We have lower turnout. In the caucus, the organization, the party leaders have a bigger role in choosing the candidates here because they make the choices about how the caucus goes. They're finding the people who are most passionate and all of that. Very, very few states do the caucus. It's usually smaller states that do the caucus, so it's definitely not as normal as what we consider the primary to be. So we've been talking a lot about the voter side of things. We've been talking about how voters participate in the primary and in the caucus. Let's shift over to the official, the political official side of things and talk about campaigns. Here we see one of the Trump campaign headquarters. And so this is what a campaign would typically look like. A lot of regular people working in not a very glamorous office, right? This looks like a very temporary space because it is, because campaigns don't happen all the time. So they just kind of set up a place to work and they get their job done as quickly as they can. The jobs of the campaign are all about finding voters, predicting how voters are going to act, and find the voters that you can sway the most. So there is a lot of campaign work that is involved in analyzing voter data from previous elections, trying to figure out who the voters have been and where they are, and being able to predict which ones are going to show up and support you and which ones you might be able to win over. The campaigns have to focus on finding the best way to reach those voters that might be swayed to support their candidate. So you've got to, go all different parts of the community and find people who aren't really sure who they're voting for and try to find out how you can convince them to support your candidate. The campaigns also have to focus on what's the best way to articulate your message. What's the best way to say what your candidate is about and appeal to the voters at the same time. Today, we talk about high-tech media campaigns, and this is not going to sound very high-tech to you guys, but we're talking about adjustments in the late 20th century here. So a high-tech media campaign, the main way that candidates reach voters is through the television. That is still true. Even in 2012, not that long ago, only 15% of all voters are using the internet to find campaign information. Candidates are entirely dependent on the media to reach voters. They rely on TV. They rely on advertising through TV and some email in order to reach their voters and find who potentially could support their campaign. The internet has changed the way that people mostly do fundraising. So this started in 2004 with a candidate named Howard Dean, who was the first person to really try to get small amounts of money from a lot of people using the internet. Obama really mastered this, and this was like one of his main sources of fundraising. But as part of campaigns, you got to raise money to run the campaign, and you could get as much as $2,500 from one wealthy donor. But it might be easier to try to get $10 from 250 different voters. It's the same amount of money. So using the internet, you can get a small amount of money with very little effort. You just send out emails and you can get a little bit of money from a whole bunch of different voters and donators. And this will end up matching the amount that you get from large donors. So the internet has changed fundraising because now a lot of the fundraising is done by the thousands out in email and on websites where candidates are trying to get small amounts of money from a whole bunch of individual donors. The older way of doing things is what we call direct mail. This is where people are like literally sending you mail, but this comes from political parties who keep lists of all the people who have donated to candidates in the past. So when a new candidate comes along, if a candidate's going to come along in 2025 and run as a Democrat, they're going to reach out to the Democratic Party who's going to give them access to these lists of former donors. So this is one of the most effective ways of finding donors. It seems old-fashioned, but it takes almost no effort and almost no money, and it generates a lot of returns. So if I'm a person who's donated to Democratic candidates in the past and a new candidate reaches out to me, they're doing so because they know I've donated in the past and because they think that they are going to like share some policy preferences with me. So it's a good way to try to find potential support and potential donors. There's a lot of people that make up a campaign. This is definitely not all of them, but these are ones we want to make sure we're familiar with, that we could talk about if we needed to. Most important is the campaign manager. Their job is just to run the campaign. They oversee the whole staff. They make decisions about how the campaign runs, and they're going to help the candidate be the most effective over the course of the whole campaign. Other people that are super important would be the fundraisers. They have to not just like raise money, but they've got to do the research. They're going to locate and find the people who are most likely to donate. It's really important to do this effectively. It's also really important that you have lawyers. The lawyers are there to make sure that your campaign is following all the proper rules, that you don't get into any trouble, that you're in compliance with all of the rules of the Federal Election Commission. You got to have pollsters on your campaign. They're going to come up with public opinion polls. They're going to find out what's popular to help your campaign shift to what are the popular policy stances. Data analyst. Data analyst will find all the voting data to help you find your potential voters. And the most important of all, you're going to have volunteers. You're going to have to find people to do the street level work of the campaign, to work at events, to go door to door and contact voters and all that. So it's a huge team of people that are working to help make your candidate successful. Here's President Trump at his own campaign headquarters here. So you've got all the people working for President Trump's campaign, and he is nice enough to come by and talk to everybody. It looks like he's having a killer time there at his 2020 campaign spot. As we talked about campaigns and campaign season, it's going to be important for us to compare the differences between primaries and caucuses. Also, when we're talking about primaries, important for us to be able to compare the differences in open and closed primaries. So we got to be talking about like how this impacts voters, how this impacts campaign choices, who participates, and what is important about the results here. It's always important for us to be able to explain the importance of the Iowa caucus and the New Hampshire primary since they take place first. Why are they so important on the campaign trail? And we'd want to make sure that we understand all the different roles of a candidate's political campaign. All right, almost done talking campaigns here. We got one more day to talk about. We're going to talk about money in campaigns coming up. So we'll be dealing with all the different ways that people donate and raise money for political campaigns and some of the laws involved, talking about how candidates are able to spend money for their campaigns.